I thought yoga was just exercise, until her hand on my back made my heart skip a beat. The first time he walked into the yoga studio, he didn't expect anything more than a quiet hour to stretch and clear his head. The soft hum of ambient music floated through the room, mingling with the faint, calming scent of lavender and sandalwood. The sunlight spilling through the tall windows hit the polished wooden floors, warming the space just enough to make him feel at ease. It was peaceful, but then she appeared. She moved across the room with the kind of grace that seemed almost effortless. Her presence didn't demand attention, yet somehow, it drew it naturally. She was in her early 40s, with a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Her hair was loosely tied back, soft strands brushing the sides of her face as she adjusted mats and greeted students with a calm, genuine smile. Every movement had an understated elegance, and he found himself watching more than he intended. When she approached him to guide his posture, he felt a small jolt, not surprising in a yoga class, but different. Her hands were warm and steady as she gently shifted his shoulders, aligned his back, and corrected the curve of his spine. It was purely professional, yet the way her fingers lingered ever so slightly against his skin left a subtle, unshakable impression. The warmth of her touch contrasted with the cool air of the studio, and he realized that something about her presence made him acutely aware of every part of himself, every muscle, every breath. Her voice was soft, measured, and surprisingly reassuring. "Try to keep your focus on your breathing," she said, and even in those simple words there was a warmth that seemed directed only at him. He noticed how she seemed to notice everything, his small fumbles, his hesitant stretches, and how her encouragement never felt forced. It wasn't just technique, it was patience, kindness, and an almost imperceptible curiosity in her gaze. The first class ended too quickly. As he rolled up his mat, he felt a lingering awareness of her presence behind him. She was straightening the mats, her movements slow and deliberate, but the faintest hint of a smile tugged at her lips when their eyes met. It lasted for a second, barely more than a glance, but in that instant, a quiet understanding passed between them, a subtle acknowledgement that this connection, whatever it was, had begun. He left the studio that day with the memory of her touch and her steady, observant gaze lingering in his mind. Every step on the street back to his apartment felt heavier and lighter at the same time, as if the air carried a weight of anticipation he didn't yet understand. Something about her was magnetic, but not overwhelming, inviting, but careful. He didn't know it yet, but this first encounter, the brief touches, the fleeting looks, the calm warmth she exuded, was only the beginning of a story either of them could ignore. After a few weeks of classes, the yoga studio had become a familiar sanctuary for him, a place where he could breathe and stretch away the noise of everyday life. But it wasn't just the poses that drew him back, it was her. She moved through the room with the same calm authority, yet with an undercurrent of warmth that made each interaction feel personal, even when it was subtle. One evening, after class, a few students lingered, chatting quietly, and he found himself walking toward the small cafe across the street. To his surprise, she appeared there too, settling at a corner table with her usual composure, sipping from a cup of green tea. She looked up, and their eyes met. No words were needed to acknowledge the coincidence. He hesitated, then smiled, and she returned it, the corners of her eyes crinkling ever so slightly. Sitting across from her, he noticed details he hadn't before, the soft warmth of her hands around the cup, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in her hair, the way her shoulders relaxed as she exhaled slowly. They spoke casually at first, about class, schedules, favorite poses, but the conversation quickly deepened, flowing naturally into stories about weekends, books, and small moments of life that often go unnoticed. There was no rush, no forced laughter, just the ease of two people gradually discovering comfort in each other's presence. During a lull in conversation, their hands brushed while reaching for sugar or stirring their drinks. The touch was fleeting, yet it left a ripple of awareness in him, a subtle, grounding warmth that made his chest tighten. She noticed, too, a small smile playing on her lips, but neither acknowledged it with words. It was an unspoken exchange, a quiet acknowledgement that their connection was growing beyond casual conversation. He began to appreciate the rhythm of their interactions, the gentle teasing, the way she remembered small details about him, how he sometimes held tension in his shoulders during downward dog, or how he struggled with balance in tree pose. Her observations weren't intrusive, they were considerate, attentive, and somehow reassuring. It was in these moments, when she noticed him noticing her, that the slow, subtle attraction took root. The world outside the cafe felt distant. The soft clinking of cups, the muted hum of other patrons, the faint warmth of the afternoon sun filtering through the window, all of it seemed to orbit around the quiet gravity between them. He noticed how she leaned slightly forward when sharing a story, how her eyes held his a beat longer than necessary, and how her laughter, light and unassuming, lingered in the air long after the sound faded. By the time they parted, there was a sense of something unspoken, a gentle pull neither could name yet. He walked away feeling lighter, yet strangely restless, carrying with him the memory of her warmth, her gaze, and the quiet intimacy of a conversation that had felt, in its subtlety, profoundly significant. He knew he would return, not just for yoga, but for these fleeting moments that lingered far longer than they should, marking the first threads of a connection that neither time nor caution could easily sever. Over the next few weeks, their brief interactions after class evolved into something quieter, more deliberate. He started noticing subtle patterns in her gestures, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear when lost in thought, the gentle tilt of her head when listening intently, the small exhale she released when a student finally held a challenging pose. These details, almost imperceptible to anyone else, drew him in. He felt increasingly aware of her presence, and the familiarity began to feel comfortable, even essential. One evening, after class, they lingered longer than usual in the empty studio. The warm, late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, softening the edges of the polished floorboards and casting a gentle glow on her face. The other students had long gone, leaving them in quiet solitude, and she seemed unusually contemplative. For the first time, he saw a vulnerability in her eyes, a softness behind her usually confident demeanor. She spoke hesitantly, almost to herself at first. "Some days it feels like everything I do is just balancing acts," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying a subtle weight of honesty. "Work, life, personal commitments, and sometimes it all feels a little too much." Her gaze drifted to the sunlight, lingering on the floor before meeting his eyes again. He could see the effort it took for her to admit this, the careful restraint in her posture, and it made her suddenly more human, more real to him. He listened with quiet attentiveness, leaning slightly forward, letting her words fill the space without interruption. There was a delicate intimacy in the way they sat, just close enough for warmth, far enough to respect boundaries. When she gestured mid-story, his hand accidentally brushed hers. The touch was brief, accidental, yet it carried an electric warmth that neither could ignore. She pulled back slightly but didn't move away completely, leaving the moment suspended in a gentle tension. Her voice softened further as she continued. She spoke of small regrets, the people she missed, the dreams she'd put aside. Each revelation revealed a layer of her she rarely shared with anyone, and he found himself wanting to respond, to offer comfort, but unsure how to bridge the distance without overstepping. Still, there was a quiet understanding between them, a recognition that trust had been given, however delicately. He realized, in that moment, that attraction was no longer just physical. It was the pull of shared vulnerability, the magnetic draw of someone allowing themselves to be seen fully, even in fragments. Every subtle glance, every fleeting touch of hands, every pause that lingered just long enough to notice, amplified the tension between them. By the time they finally stood to leave, the studio felt different, charged with unspoken words, a quiet warmth lingering in the air. She gave him a small, almost shy smile, and for a second, he felt that fragile connection shimmer between them. Walking home, he replayed her words and the warmth of her hand, understanding that something profound had begun. This was no longer casual attraction, it was the first, delicate thread of emotional intimacy, spun with care, and he sensed it would only grow more intricate with time. The weeks slipped by, each class leaving a quiet imprint on his mind. He had grown more confident in his poses, yet his attention rarely wavered from her. Every time she moved across the room, guiding others with effortless grace, he found himself observing small details. The way her hands moved, the soft cadence of her instructions, the subtle way her eyes would meet his when correcting a pose. Their connection had grown from fleeting glances to a deeper awareness, an almost electric familiarity that neither could articulate. One evening, during a particularly challenging session, she approached him for a posture adjustment. He felt the familiar warmth of her hands on his back, steady yet gentle. "Relax your shoulders, let the tension go," she murmured, her breath brushing his ear as she guided him. His chest tightened, not from exertion, but from the nearness of her. The studio was quiet except for the soft background music, yet in that moment, the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them. Her hands lingered slightly longer than necessary, tracing the line of his spine as if ensuring he felt supported, not just physically but in some unspoken emotional way. He tried to focus on the pose, but the warmth of her touch and the subtle scent of her perfume, the faintest hint of jasmine mixed with something earthy, made it impossible to remain entirely present. His awareness of her grew more acute, the curve of her fingers, the way her elbow barely brushed his arm, the soft exhale she released when she stepped back to observe his alignment. "Careful, you're making me lose focus," she said lightly, her voice tinged with amusement. It wasn't flirtation in the overt sense. It was the quiet recognition of the tension simmering between them. He felt his heart quicken, a flush creeping up his neck. She returned to her usual professional poise immediately, yet the subtle teasing lingered in the air, heavy and magnetic. The class continued, but the brief, charged contact had shifted something. Every movement, every adjustment, every shared smile was now underlined with a gentle awareness of each other. When she passed by to correct another student, their eyes met for a fraction longer than necessary, and he caught the faintest curve of a smile on her lips. It was enough to send a shiver down his spine and make his mind replay the moment over and over. After class, as they rolled up mats and cleaned the studio, their proximity remained natural. Small, unintentional touches, her hand brushing his as they reached for the same towel, a shared laugh at a minor mishap, held a quiet intimacy. He noticed how she seemed to pause slightly when handing him a bottle of water, their fingers meeting briefly, the warmth of contact lingering just long enough to leave a trace. Walking home that evening, he couldn't shake the memory of her hands, her voice, the faint brush of her presence against him. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was the slow, deliberate awakening of desire and care, framed in gestures that were professional, yet impossibly tender. Each touch, each glance, each soft, teasing remark built a rhythm of tension, subtle and unspoken, a melody of connection that neither of them could ignore. As their connection deepened, he found himself caught between desire and hesitation. Each class, each brief conversation, each accidental touch left a quiet echo in his mind. He admired her, not just her poise, her confidence, or the gentle way she guided students, but the vulnerability she had begun to share with him. And yet the age difference, the professional boundaries, and the fear of misreading signals weighed heavily on him. He often lingered after class, rolling up his mat slowly, telling himself it was simply to practice mindfulness. But in truth, he wanted just a few more moments near her, a few more glances, a few more words that might reveal the subtle warmth he sensed but couldn't name. He noticed the way she sometimes held his gaze just a little too long, or how her fingers brushed his briefly as she handed him a towel. And every time, his heart reminded him that this was delicate territory. She, too, seemed caught in a quiet struggle. He noticed it in the slight hesitation when she spoke to him, in the careful way she maintained professional composure even as her eyes betrayed small flickers of curiosity or amusement. Sometimes, during class, she would pause mid-instruction, her gaze drifting toward him for a heartbeat longer than necessary. It was enough to send his pulse racing, yet both understood the unspoken rules they had to respect. Outside the studio, he replayed their interactions over and over. Every brush of hands, every accidental touch, every soft laugh felt like a tender promise he wasn't sure he was allowed to follow. "Am I reading too much into this?" he asked himself. Is she even aware of it? The uncertainty gnawed at him, mingling excitement with anxiety, desire with caution. She wrestled with similar thoughts, he realized through subtle cues. The way she occasionally sighed after class, the fleeting tension in her shoulders, the way she lingered near the door as if gathering courage before walking away. She cared about her students, about her professional integrity, yet something about him, his sincerity, his attentiveness, the quiet steadiness in his presence, made her question how far she could let herself feel without crossing boundaries. Even in their shared moments outside class, a brief chat at a cafe, a passing smile in the hallway, there was an unspoken tension. Both were acutely aware of the delicate balance. A step too close could shatter the fragile intimacy they were building, a step too far could leave lingering regret. And yet, the pull remained undeniable. It was in this hesitation, this quiet struggle between longing and restraint, that the tension became almost tangible. Each glance, each touch, each pause carried weight, charged with possibility and uncertainty. The emotional intimacy between them deepened not despite the hesitation, but because of it, an intricate dance of desire, respect, and patience. By the end of each day, he would walk home replaying their moments, feeling both warmth and frustration. She would return to her quiet apartment, tracing the brief touches and lingering glances, wondering how far she could allow herself to lean toward him. Theirs was a connection built not on impulsive passion, but on the slow, deliberate acknowledgement of attraction, respect, and mutual curiosity. And in that delicate tension lay the promise of something profoundly, quietly beautiful. The breakthrough came on an evening that felt suspended between ordinary and extraordinary. The studio was closed, emptied of students and the usual hum of activity, leaving only the faint echo of their footsteps and the soft, golden light of street lamps spilling through the windows. He had come for his usual practice, unsure if she would stay late, and she had. They found themselves lingering together, the quiet space between them heavy with unspoken words. They started talking casually, at first about the day, the weather, the lingering tension of long hours, but the conversation gradually deepened. She spoke about dreams she had once nurtured, now shelved for practicality, the small moments she missed from her past, and the people who had shaped her in ways both joyful and painful. He listened intently, leaning slightly forward, letting her words sink in. Each confession, each soft revelation, allowed him to see her in ways he hadn't before, not just as a yoga instructor, but as a woman with hopes, regrets, and quiet resilience. The emotional intimacy was amplified by the small, unintentional touches that had become their language. When she reached for the water bottle, their fingers brushed, lingering for a fraction longer than necessary. He caught her glance, and there it was again, a fleeting acknowledgement of their mutual awareness. There was no rush, no overt declaration, just the delicate realization that they had been dancing around something deeper, waiting for permission to acknowledge it. At one point, the conversation drifted to moments of loneliness, and he admitted that he often felt unmoored in a world that moved too fast. She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting understanding and a subtle vulnerability. He reached out, tentatively placing his hand near hers on the table. She didn't pull away, instead, she allowed it, a quiet gesture of trust that spoke volumes. The warmth of her skin against his and the simple closeness of their hands created a magnetic charge, electric yet profoundly gentle. Her voice softened as she spoke of connection and timing, of the delicate balance between desire and respect. He realized that the attraction between them wasn't fleeting, it was patient, considered, and built on trust. And in that moment, all the hesitation, all the doubt, all the careful restraint crystallized into clarity. Their feelings were real, mutual, and worth exploring, even if cautiously. They stood together at the edge of the studio, shoulders almost touching, hands still near enough to feel the warmth radiating from each other. The streetlight cast a soft glow on her face, highlighting the faintest curve of a smile that had been reserved just for him. He saw in her eyes a quiet invitation, not rush, not demanding, just an acknowledgement that this connection, forged slowly and carefully, had grown into something neither could ignore. For the first time, the tension between them felt less like longing and more like recognition, an understanding that their bond had evolved beyond fleeting attraction into something profoundly intimate and real. As they left the studio together, walking side by side in the soft evening light, the unspoken promise lingered in the air, the start of something beautiful, patient, and enduring, built on trust, tenderness, and the quiet joy of being truly seen. After weeks of quiet glances, subtle touches, and shared conversations, the connection between them had grown into something undeniable. The tension that had once hung just beneath the surface had transformed into a steady warmth, a sense of closeness that felt both new and profoundly natural. By now, they knew each other not just as teacher and student, but as companions navigating the delicate rhythm of a slow-burning affection. That evening, the studio was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. They had stayed after class, lingering longer than usual, talking about the small victories and frustrations of their day. There was a comfort in the silence between their words, a quiet acknowledgement that both felt the same way but were willing to move slowly, savoring the moments before rushing into anything. As he reached for his mat, her hand brushed his, not an accidental touch this time, but deliberate, gentle, almost playful. He felt the warmth of her fingers against his, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that simple contact. He noticed the curve of her smile, the faint sparkle in her eyes, and the way her presence seemed to settle something deep inside him. She tilted her head slightly, and he could sense the quiet joy she felt in his company, the subtle ease that came from being seen without pretense. They walked together toward the door, shoulders almost touching. The air outside was cool and crisp, contrasting with the warmth of the studio, yet he felt the lingering warmth of her near him. When their hands finally met, it was natural, unforced, a gentle intertwining of fingers that carried the weight of unspoken promises and newfound trust. Neither spoke, yet their closeness said everything words could not: respect, care, admiration, and the tender thrill of mutual affection. As they stepped onto the quiet street, the soft sunlight caught her hair, and he noticed the way it framed her face, falling in loose strands that invited, rather than demanded, attention. They walked side by side, occasionally brushing shoulders, occasionally exchanging fleeting smiles that said, without words, "I see you. I like this. I want to be near you." There was no rush to define the relationship, no pressure to label the feelings. They were content simply to exist in this shared space, savoring each moment of connection. By the time they reached the corner where their paths diverged, there was a sense of gentle completion, as if a chapter had closed and a new one quietly began. He lingered for a moment, brushing her hand with his once more before stepping back, giving space while still holding on to the warmth of the touch. She returned the gesture, her smile soft and knowing, eyes meeting his with an intimacy that spoke of trust and patience. In that final exchange, the story found its resolution. The age difference, the initial hesitation, the subtle tension, they had all melted into a steady bond, built on respect, shared vulnerability, and tender attention. Neither needed to rush. The affection was real, mutual, and enduring. And as he walked home, replaying the warmth of her hand, the light of her smile, and the gentle comfort of her presence, he understood that this was not a fleeting attraction but a slow-burning connection, one that promised patience, tenderness, and the quiet joy of being truly known and cherished.